It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. John Ahl this evening.
Thank you all. So I'm going to start out. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, so I'll give you a video, which is maybe worth at least that many. But fair warning, it's a little bloody, so if you're disturbed easily, be warned. Well, I'm pretty well fucked. I fell through that hole. Thankfully, I didn't keep falling that way. I got trapped here instead. On this ledge, my arm I can't use. I'm gonna have to somehow climb out that way. I can't go that way at all. I gotta stop on this ledge. Oh. Oh. How the fuck do I get back up there though? Fuck. Oh. I'm gonna try and, I fell through that hole. That way, I didn't fall down, thankfully. My right arm is seizing up, I can't use it anymore. I'm gonna try and stem above that, get through that, try and hit that way. Hopefully I can escape. Doesn't look easy, that's my hole I fell through. That's my path, I'm gonna try. It doesn't look fucking easy, but that's all I can do. I don't have a right arm. Oh, so I can't get out this way. It's too soft. I can't talk because I have a broken rib, I think. Or my chest is filling with blood or something. So I fell all the way down there. I've crawled out through here. But say I can't get out that way. So I'm gonna have to crawl through there. Try and climb up, out through this thing. Hopefully I can get out. I'm so fucking close now. Oh fuck, I hurt bad. But I gotta get out. Can't use my right arm. Oh, I'm so close. It's gonna be so fucking easy if I don't work in your right arm. Oh shit. Climbed all the way. Over, up, over. So fucking close. Fuck. I just gotta go a little further. I can do it. My aunt. My aunt said she didn't know I knew those words. It's really weird for me to be up here today. I'm not famous for doing anything amazing. Y'all won't buy my book just because of the science alone within it. All I did was fall down a hole and do what any sane person would have done. I climbed out of it. But when I say that to people and said, oh, you'll do this, you would have done the same thing, they look at me like I'm crazy and say, there's no way I could have climbed out of that crevasse. It's too deep. I'm not strong enough or brave enough. But anyone will do what they have to do to live. And your survival just depends on how well prepared you are and how ready to meet the crisis. For me, in that crevasse, I'd spent years of my life learning how to climb, how to rescue both myself and others. So when my time came, I was ready to climb out of that hole. Every day you should ask yourself, what are you preparing for? Where do your daily steps lead? Because that's the struggle our society faces today. We've let our climate system, our environmental systems, our survival systems fall into an ever-deepening hole. How do we as a society climb out? And more importantly, do we want to do the hard work of the climbing? When I look around at the direction society's been headed the past few years, I get worried. And so that's why one of the reasons I wrote this book. I'm like many geoscientists, a data guy, and the difference is my quest for data has taken me around the world to some of the most remote locations. And Icefall is the story of those pursuits, adventure for a cause. But I also wanted to tell a story that would give you all a reason more than just to run screaming or hide your head in the sand in oblivion. Although I feel that way sometimes myself when faced with the overwhelming reality of climate change. But there's plenty of books that offer doomsday climate change stuff, so I don't really want to go there. And besides that oblivion, that fearful turning away, I mean, it didn't work in the crevasse, and it's not going to work for society. I want to talk more about hope and finding a way to survive and adapt to our new environment. And I wanted you, the readers, to appreciate what goes into the science of climate, the years of effort. By most accounts, I shouldn't be here. I should be one of the growing numbers of victims of climate change. And finally, I wanted to inject into the discussion of climate change the word, the idea, the imperative of adaptation. Turning a ship takes time, and the bigger the ship, the more time. And how are we going to cope as we begin, I want to say as we begin to turn, but it doesn't, I don't know what we're waiting for. It doesn't seem like as a society we even want to turn. Instead, our planet is heading towards an ever more perilous course without any change in sight. And so we have to adapt and prepare for what lies ahead. But how did I get to that crevasse in the Himalayas in the first place? In 2014, I was doing scientific research on Mount Everest, studying climate change and pollution, as you guys saw. We wanted to sample this valley called the Western Cwm, or Valley of Silence. It was never visited by humans until the British came looking for a back door onto Everest earlier this century. Just that black one kind of left to center is Everest, and the right one is Lhotse, so you just go straight up the middle. The problem is, in order to reach this nice, pleasant valley, you have to go up the Khumbu Icefall. This is an actively flowing glacier. It's one of the most dangerous things on Mount Everest. It's killed many, many people. It's a slow-moving conveyor belt of ice. It's constantly collapsing and crushing everything within its grasp. Normally, climbers, both Westerners and Sherpas alike, hold a Buddhist puja. And that's what that video started with, was our puja on Mount Everest. And the purpose is to ask the mountain to offer our respects and ask the mountain not to kill us as we're climbing it. Unfortunately, that year, the puja didn't work. And the next day, as you saw, a terrible avalanche collapsed onto the icefall and killed a lot of people. They were trapped at this bottleneck. There was a ladder down there that collapsed. And so as they were resetting it, a bottleneck was created. And so just above it was a bulging thing of ice. Most of the people in this picture are dead. And we all have duties, and I failed in this case. I should have been there with my team to help. And instead, they were above me. And I'll always regret that I wasn't there to do more. And then we spent the day trying to figure out who was alive and who was dead as the helicopters were bringing the bodies down. We'd been joking and laughing only hours before. Suddenly they were all gone. At this point, it was one of the worst tragedies. It was the worst tragedy ever on the mountain. And we were sick with grief. Ashman is on the left. He died and left behind his wife and infant daughter. Dippin is next to him. I talk more about him in the book, but he was with me on Everest in 2010. He suffered a burst appendix. He recovered, survived. We took care of him. Again, I talk more about it in the book. And then he was back with me in 2014 because he believed in what we were doing. He was slightly below the ladder, and when he saw the bottleneck and the ice overhead, he told everyone with him to drop their packs and run downhill. And that saved 5 people, that quick thinking. Dalai Lama is to his right. He had just crossed the ladder when it collapsed, so he was forced to watch everyone be crushed just below him. He was also the most renowned of the Buddhist lamas at Everest Base Camp, so he led the base camp-wide puja to mourn the dead after the accident. And then Anil was our leader. He helped organize Ashman's funeral and take care of his family, a rock in tough times. After the accident, we all met and we held pujas and meetings to talk about what to do given these dangerous conditions. The mountain is rotting away. It's melting away beneath us. Many climbers and Sherpas wanted to continue. We wanted to continue climbing data. Other people just wanted to continue climbing. But unfortunately, Everest became a political battleground, and we all lost as the Maoists closed the mountain. They threatened to break the legs of any Sherpas who climbed. And when that didn't work, they threatened to break the legs of any of the Westerners who climbed. Finally, we heard rumors of people being beaten in the night, and we were all forced down. So we mournfully packed up our camp, said goodbye, and took our harsh memories with us. But again, we weren't there for glory. We were there for science. And so we chose another peak, Mount Himlung, which you saw again in the video. It's near Annapurna, and we continued climbing and taking data because we worked in spite of our grief, because when you commit yourself to something, the only path is to move forward, no matter the obstacles or the pain. But we had been weakened by our ordeal, and we were essentially alone. I couldn't ask my Sherpa friends to accompany us. Uliana suffered the worst, and here Jake is taking her down the face. And so that left me alone at 20,000 feet once they had descended to recover from illness and exhaustion. We only had a few short days before the monsoonal storms would make the mountain unclimbable. And so I had to stay up there alone. Ashman had sacrificed. Others had sacrificed. We wanted to get as much data as we could. It was a bright, beautiful day. I went for a short stroll somewhere I knew to be safe. I was going to collect some samples and get some water to melt to make coffee. I was planning on being gone for 30 minutes or less. I just wore a t-shirt, light jacket, no headlamp, no sat phone, nothing but my training to help me. I hadn't even had breakfast, and I was dreaming of coffee and just sitting, enjoying this view with a nice cup. And then without warning, I went from that bright sunlight to pitch black as my face smashed into a glacier wall. I bounced back and forth, breaking my bodies on the walls of the crevasse. 1 story, 2 stories, 5 stories. Finally, like a miracle, I miraculously stopped after only 7 stories, 70 feet, which only in 70 feet, maybe it's not normally together, but compared to the abyss next to it, it seemed like a fair bargain at the time. I was dead. There was no way not to be dead. But the pain meant I must still be alive. I was lying balanced on a small block of ice with my legs dangling over another void. I knew that just moving would cause me more pain than I'd ever experienced in my life before. But I did move. It took 15 minutes just to get up. And I climbed with one arm because the other arm was ripped out of its socket and shattered. The excruciating pain as I spread as I climbed. At 20,000 feet, every panting breath felt terrible through all my cracked ribs, and I just wanted to pass out and fade away. But when I looked between my legs into the maw of the beast, I thought about my mom and how tiny and fragile she is. And I knew that the fact that they could never find my body would tear her up, and I just couldn't do that to her. So after hours of climbing through mind-numbing pain, I was only a few feet below the surface. I could see the sun muted through a foot of snow that I had to dig through to reach fresh air. Yes, I had to dig myself out of my own grave after my death had been assured. I then had to crawl back to my tent and send out a distress call. I waited 19 hours for the helicopter. The whole time I was laying in the tent, there was a water bottle next to me. My thirst was excruciating, and I desperately wanted that cool liquid I could hear sloshing inside. But you can't open an Nalgene water bottle with one hand. I tried with my teeth, ice axes. I never got it open. My thirst grew overwhelming. Time froze, and I lived in an extended purgatory through the night. I waited 19 hours with 15 broken bones, including 6 broken vertebrae, 6 broken ribs, a smashed face, internal bleeding, broken arm, chunks of bone everywhere. It took extensive x-rays and MRIs over months to find out exactly what the damage it was. My shoulder was so badly dislocated that even once I made it to the hospital, it took 4 people nearly 20 minutes of wrestling to get it back into its socket. I was so close to the edge. But I'm alive because I didn't quit. Hour after hour, I could have faded into nothingness and escaped the pain. But then I wouldn't have seen my mom's smile of relief, and I wouldn't be here talking to y'all today. And I wouldn't have been famous for a week or two. I posted my videos on Facebook for family and friends. One of my relatives didn't have Facebook, so I posted it on YouTube, and it exploded. Every major news outlet in the world. I saw my name in news articles in Arabic and Portuguese and Korean and languages I had no idea what they were. I was interviewed on the Today Show, Anderson Cooper 360, Good Morning America, all of them. But what have I learned from that experience? Do what's important to you and do it with all that you have. I've learned that we're all stronger than we think, that we gain power from our family and friends, as I did via satellite through that long night, that these relationships are the most important things in life. If you've ever read Tom Sawyer, for me, it was the same as when he walked in on his own funeral. It resets your life's expectations, and you see what you really care about in a lot more detail. You look at yourself and you ask, if I had died then, at that moment, what would have saddened me the worst? What friendships and loves and dreams would I have most regretted that I failed to nurture? What really means something to me deep down? I've moved to a place I love, and I founded the Mountain Environments Research Institute at Western Washington University in order to preserve the mountains of the world and study their societies. And I just took the Washington State Bar exam, because today being a scientist isn't enough. You have to be able to defend science and its results, no matter how politically unpalatable. Was the bar exam difficult? It's not quite as bad as a crevasse. I wasn't born to be a mountaineer. I grew up in the fields of Georgia and lived in Kentucky, so the knowledge of mountains was hard won. But when I was a kid reading adventures about heroes, mountains always stuck with me. In fact, when I was 10, I had 3 goals in life: to climb Everest and to compete in the Ironman and Iditarod. 1 down, 2 to go. When I was in grad school, I began working with the American Alpine Club, conserving mountain environments in the U.S. The ACC does some amazing work, and it's our nation's leading climbing advocacy and conservation group. But all the older climbers have witnessed climate change changing the mountains. Changes that make mountaineering far more difficult and dangerous, as Phil Powers, the president, noted. It's not getting easier. Every time we go into the mountains, it's a fresh environment. From that beginning, I co-founded the American Climber Science Program to bring climbers and scientists together to the international locations, places without the financial resources for extensive conservation or research. This is 2 physicists from the University of Nevada, Reno, with me in Peru. But after the crevasse, I realized that I needed to prepare for the future, that we need to prepare for the future. And that meant focusing more on students. So I created this new institute at Western Washington, again, working with climbers and scientists, but also outdoor educators and community development specialists. Our goal is to train the next generation of mountain scientists, explorers who venture out for the greater good of mankind. We need data. We need it now, and we need it for the future. It's easy to think about climate change as being a distant, economic, maybe only affecting far-off glaciers. But it's dramatic, and it has devastating personal effects. In 2010, I saw what was probably the first death on climate change on Mount Everest. When ice collapsed on the North Col, up there around that black eye. See the debris below it? It swept away 2 Hungarians, and it was an unprecedented icefall. But when I tell people that, they say, climate change on Mount Everest, avalanches, don't people die on avalanches all the time? Sure they do. Snow avalanches. Fresh snow is unstable. It avalanches. People die around the world. This is different. Thousands of year-old ice is being exposed to melting, and it's peeling off the mountain one deadly chunk at a time. And it's something you can only understand if you've spent years studying it and understand the rhythms of the mountain. And of course, in 2014, I was there again when 16 people died, and Mount Everest itself was closed. Ashman, my friend and climbing partner, when he was killed, we raised money for his daughter and for his wife so that they'll have a good life, but it's never enough. We can't replace him. Death in those extreme locations is just the most dramatic harbinger of change, but we're surrounded by smaller indications all the time. I've seen ever more massive fires sweep across southern Africa, lack of water grip the rainforests in Costa Rica. We've all seen tornadoes rise more destructively, and their risk lasts through longer periods of the year. Droughts across Texas and California hit closer to home, but the effect of drought is worldwide. On the other end of the spectrum, again, we remember the floods in Louisiana last year. But over the past decade, over 2 billion people have been affected by flood. In southern Africa, I've seen the amazing wildlife die from drought one year and flood the next. People don't want to attribute these events to changing climate, but that's where scientific data comes in. I've spent the past 20 years of my life gathering evidence of environmental change and human resilience around the world. In Icefall, I talk about those changes, from the Colorado River in northern Mexico to Africa's savannas, Alaska's mountains, and the jungles of Honduras. No matter where I've worked and traveled in dozens of countries, the story is always the same. Our dear planet Earth is not what it used to be. Its delicate chemistry is changing at a pace never before documented. Environmental transformation is sweeping across the Earth. These changes aren't limited to distant exotic locales, although high latitudes, far mountain ranges are certainly our canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. We've all read about grim diseases like West Nile virus taking up residence in our own neighborhoods, South Florida's water table being threatened by rising sea levels, permafrost melting under Alaskan streets and buildings, droughts in Texas, lakes drying up across the West. Debating whether we can stop climate change or even that it exists is a fool's errand. I did not become a scientist, though, to grind a political axe. Quite the contrary. I wanted to understand the world. I wanted to see it up close and put my hands and feet into the soil and rock and water. But what I've learned from that work is unambiguous. We have a crisis on our hands. But we can overcome crisis by adaptation. And my book has examples of all sorts of communities around the world. So I want to give you a more personal example. This is one of my most proud photographs ever, because this is my friend Clinton Lewis, and he's on the summit of Ashinka, which is an 18,143-foot mountain in Peru. Clinton's a professional photographer, and I had invited him in 2011 to join me on an expedition, but he wasn't prepared, mentally or physically. He failed on every climb. He got close on Ashinka, but he never could reach the summit. And so he spent the next 2 years training and adapting himself towards what he wanted to achieve. He'd realized that he wanted to climb those mountains, that he had unfinished business. So he began lifting weights and running and backpacking and studying nutrition and expeditions. And when he returned in 2013 with me, it was a totally different matter. And you don't need to read all this, but this was his list he made to summarize the 2 trips. He went from crying and shattered to summiting 4 peaks and a pass all over 17,000 feet. He was able to participate fully and enjoy the expedition. He was strong and happy, and the adaptations he made in order to realize his dream was complete. His joy was our joy. Since then, he's run 2 marathons, and he's training now for a 100-mile trail marathon. He took this picture in 2013, a little happier, and I was proud to include it in my book. Adaptation transformed his life. The key with expeditions is what I call avoiding a story. People ask for adventures and I'm disappointed because I rarely have them. Well, I guess that's a relative term since my book's full of drug runners and leeches and love and frostbite. But the adventure to expedition ratio is still fairly low. And the key is that if you prepare, plan, then you can achieve your goals with minimal excitement, maximum outcomes. Clinton did that, and as a society, that's what we all need to do. But we don't need to plan for a single peak. We need to plan for a changing environment. And so I'm building the Earth Mountain Environments Research Institute to help protect one part of the planet. You have to ask yourselves, what are you doing? What can you help protect? People always ask me, how can I have a job like yours? How can I travel and see the world and have adventures? I teach environmental science, and it's allowed me to travel and do research. And it also teaches you how to make a difference in the world, how to protect our world. But there are other jobs that can do that. Often it's just a question of how you approach it, what your passion is. I think the key is to continue learning. Your mind is the only thing you always carry with you, and the more prepared it is, the more likely you are to survive and succeed. In that crevasse, it was essentially the only thing I had to help me, and without it, I'd be entombed in ice to this day. The more skills you have, the more actively you can participate in an expedition and in work and in life as we face changes ahead. Everything contributes to who you are, and nothing is wasted. And so hold on, a little water. Oh, that was good. And so I've created my future because I believe students are our future. Young people venturing into the wild places of the earth and surviving and thriving. And with climate change as a whole, we got to move past the tired arguments from flat earthers. Climate change is here, and no political appointment is going to change that. We must move forward with passion to defend the planet. When you hear about those who want to wage war on knowledge, let me suggest this. Denying climate change is like denying earthquakes or volcanoes or gravity. It's chemistry, it's physics, it's here, it's not belief. We need greater focus and greater energy behind political and social processes of adapting to it. People ask me, who do I vote for? I don't vote for a political party. I vote for whoever believes in science and the environment in the future. And unfortunately, there just aren't many of those. Because while trade agreements and jobs and who's in what bathroom and school vouchers are all important, fundamentally changing the planet we live on is forever. And to me, that's the most important thing when I look at a ballot. I honestly believe that when we rise up to meet that challenge, we'll not only be a lot more serious about dealing with climate change, but a lot of the other ills that plague society. But as with many things, delay is not our friend. So I want to finish my talk in a long way by exploring teamwork and adaptation in Costa Rica. We're still in the mountains. We're just trading ice falls for leeches and snakes. Our goal was to travel across the entire isthmus from the Pacific to the Atlantic We were going to start out with the blue line, sea kayaking, to test the team, make sure that everyone was ready for the expedition. Then the green line, we were going to mountain bike. Then the purple line is crossing through the Talamanca Mountains. The Talamanca Mountains have been closed to everyone since Manuel Noriega's drug trafficking days. The yellow line is the border between Costa Rica and Panama. And so they used that as a drug trafficking thing. And Costa Rica just shut down the park. They said no one can go in or out. So we were the first team in decades to be able to go into that area. And our goal was to monitor roadkill as we mountain biked through agricultural fields to see how roads disrupt species migration. The more species there are, the more impact roads have. And this is by far and away the closest I ever want to get to a fer de lance, which is a really deadly snake. And then once we were in the Talamancas, we were collecting soil samples, vegetation, studying animal habitats and animal distribution. But it was an unusual team. I had one Costa Rican scientist who had lived his life in the forest. I had two ex-Olympic cross-country skiing scientists. I had a Navy SEAL, soon-to-be Navy SEAL, and a professional ice climber. Most of them liked cold more than heat. They weren't jungle folk, but they were strong and hardy and used to tough expeditions. They had great attitudes and were adaptable to any circumstance. And that adaptability is what allows a team or a society to succeed. We started out with sea kayaking, and at this point, I had to cut a long-distance cyclist who had come from Switzerland to join us. They just weren't ready for so much exertion and such deadly high heat and humidity. It was like operating in a sauna. I hated to do it, but there's just no room for error in these types of environments. We then dipped our mountain bike tires into the Pacific Ocean and began biking through sweltering agricultural lowlands. Each morning we grew closer to the mountains as the temperature soared. We continued collecting data. Finally, exhausted, dehydrated, we left our mountain bikes behind and picked up our massive packs, set foot into the jungle. This bridge was our last link with civilization as we launched into the forest. And we spent the next 14 days hacking our way through the primordial forest. No paths, no sign of humans, no rescues possible. Our guide was a native and his son. He had traveled the jungle with his dad years before as a kid, and it was his knowledge that got us through the ridges and along the creeks because no one else had been in here in decades. Each 12 to 14 hours of constant effort would only gain us a few hard-fought miles. I'm used to doing like 30 miles when you're backpacking. There were several days when we worked from dusk till dawn and went fewer than 2 miles. I don't have many pictures of the suffering because it usually was under deep canopy and you're going straight up the side of a mud bank. But we got the data we needed, and the data's priceless. This 10-foot long snakeskin was in our camp early in the trip. And so every day we had to clear every inch of ground cover before we could sleep to avoid the ever-present danger of instant death. Near the end of the trip, Rebecca, which is the one woman, and she's one of the cross-country skiers, Olympic, she chopped the vegetation where we were going to put a hammock, and there was a fer de lance right there. So it had a choice. Thankfully, it went that way, between someone's legs. But we were lucky. There was an unprecedented drought, and it didn't rain for the entire 14 days we were in the jungle. It was amazing. Our guide was freaked out. There's no other word for it. In his nearly 60 years, he had never seen a drought like this. He marveled at the things he saw, but he was deeply afraid for what it meant for the forest. This was the middle of the rainy season, and we had expected, excuse me again. We had expected to see 8 or more hours of rain every day, not a minute of it. The drought made the traveling a lot easier. It wasn't nearly as muddy, but it was devastating to jungle flora and fauna. From a personal standpoint, I was actually selfishly exultant. The drought forced the wildlife down into the river valleys, and while it meant we didn't see nearly as monkeys or other denizens of the jungle, it also meant the snakes went down there too, and I really hate snakes. We had planned for 12, possibly 13 days in the jungle, but the trip had been far tougher than we expected. The science is slow and hard in these environments, and basically we ran out of food as we went through the trackless jungle. You may laugh and say, nice planning, expert, why didn't you bring more food? But in our defense, Carl and I each had 100 pounds on our backs when we left into the jungle, and that was my limit. I wasn't carrying any more. Finally, we reached this bridge made of vines and cables, and we're back in civilization. Once we reached the road, we split up. I had a short 26-mile walk to the Atlantic Ocean, while my team took the bus to the hotel on the beach. I was the only one who'd been able to fight my way through all the obstacles and go from coast to coast under my own power. And so they gleefully headed for cold beer and a warm shower, while I had to trudge the last couple of dozen miles. But I thought it was important that we went from coast to coast. This entire Costa Rican anecdote was to bring you to this picture. Alistair was our Navy SEAL medic. And at this point in the trip, he was worried. He diagnosed himself that he might die in the night because he was so ill from infection. We were up at 5 a.m. We were out of food. We're cleaning up camp, and we had just split a cup of coffee for breakfast. That was it. And he's smiling. He's broadly smiling. He's happy as heck to be doing here, doing something meaningful in this incredible environment. And that attitude is what it takes to adapt and survive. Unfortunately, we need our politicians to work together with more of a positive attitude, and perhaps we can become serious about dealing with protecting our world. So my body's covered with scars, and it's been torn up so many times. As you'll read in the book, I've fled drug plantations in Guatemala, elephants in Africa, snakes, guns. I've had 9 guns pointed at me in my life while doing research. And I climbed out of that crevasse in the Himalayas. It's already been a full life, and the future looks even richer. But you guys can see I'm not the fastest or skinniest, and people are always surprised that someone like me would try some of this stuff. But we're all capable of amazing things if you just do it and pursue your passions fully. Once you've prepared and conditions are right, your commitment is what dictates success, like the leap onto your surfboard or stepping off of a cliff to paraglide or saying I love you to someone for the first time. Sometimes in life there's that second of irreversible commitment, and if you can seize that moment and embrace it, then the rest falls into place, and each succeeding second becomes simpler and simpler. But if you don't believe when you make that first leap, if you fumble it and flail it just for a second, then that hesitation is all it takes for catastrophe. So all I can tell you is you only have one life, and you never know if you're going to die tomorrow out taking a stroll for a cup of coffee. So live well. I've already died once, and I don't want to do it again until I've lived all of my dreams and done everything in life. And I hope that you'll feel the same way as we face the future together. If I can leave you with just one thought, it's that our wild planet is changing at a miraculous speed, and we can't just sit by and watch. We need to get out there and see what's happening and begin adapting for the future. Thank you. So I guess we can do questions now if you want to come to if you have any questions. You have to come up to the mic. They want to get it recorded. I know, you would think they would be able to pass it around or something.
I'll hold your beer.
Well, it's fine with me, but.
So my question is, when you were collecting the samples on Everest, was it your own research, or who or what organization were you collecting them for, and what specific things were you looking for in that data?
Basically, NSF funded part of it. My university had funded part of it. But it was one of the main things that we do is we collect dust samples on the mountains. That was the thing with writing this talk. I'm used to science talks, and I wanted to show you all graphs and techniques, and I thought, well, that may not work. So one of the main things we do is we collect dust samples on glaciers. And so by collecting fresh dust on fresh snow, you can see what's trapped in the air, because it's kind of like if you leave a bowl of water out, you know how it collects the dust? Snow's the same way. And so it'll entrain whatever's in the atmosphere. And so we'll collect a bunch of it. I think you saw in the video, we're getting Ziploc bags of snow. We melt it down, we run it through filters, and then we can take that back and see, is it minerals that come from mining? Is it black carbon from diesel? Is it from agricultural burning? And that lets us find out both something about the air quality, but then also how quickly the glaciers are melting. Because the more dust you add, the darker it gets, the faster it melts. So a combination of things. Go, please do.
Would you find more or less in somewhere as remote as Everest versus if you were on Rainier doing the same thing?
Well, Rainier is tricky because we get all the air coming off the Pacific, which is clean. I mean, maybe some Chinese something, but yeah, it's the Pacific. There's nothing. If you sample like the White Mountains in New England, they're getting all that stuff coming off of Chicago and Detroit and everything else. Surprisingly, one of the big differences is when we look at something like black carbon, which we can evaluate if it comes from diesel or from agricultural burning, because the amount of C14 in it. But in Nepal, which is between China and India, it is mostly diesel that we're finding that's making, depositing on the glaciers. In Peru, right next to a big city that's belching out diesel and everything else, so much closer approximately, it actually is almost all agricultural burning, and there's almost no diesel. So it's really hard to generalize. You just don't know. I mean, I'm sure that Mount Rainier is going to have a lot more pollution than Mount Baker, just because of what's next to them. You know, Seattle's going to be pumping a lot more. But it's kind of like acid rain. It's one of those things, if you're downwind, you know, your glaciers are going to suffer just like your forests will from acid rain. So,
Thank you.
yeah, of course, of course. Other questions?
When you were down there in the crevasse, how did you film yourself? You have a movie camera?
No, wherever I go when I'm traveling, because I'm a scientist, I take photographic data. So one of the main ways that I take data, again, I talk a lot about it in the book, is like in Africa. I'll take a GPS and we'll go out and say, all right, I want to make a map of the landscape. And so I'll take a GPS and walk to a place and just stop and say, all right, what's in the 360 around me? And is there vegetation here? Is there fire here? Has there been human harvesting things? What are the species present? So I take a snapshot of that one location. Then I go a little further down and take another one and another one and another one. So everything I do, I always have a camera right here for collecting data. And it was the same thing with being down in that crevasse. I'm like, well, first of all, I figured, well, none of my friends are going to believe how deep this is. So, but then too, it was for my mom and for other, you know, I wanted people to understand, you know, just how overwhelming it was. And, but people always ask me, well, was this for if you die or whatever? And I never thought that. If I would have allowed myself to picture the idea of death, it might have been a lot more likely to have happened. Instead, it was just all emotions utterly shut down, and I was just a machine. It's like, okay, I have this problem. I'll get the camera out. I'll talk about the problem. Now it's time to start climbing. Oh, yeah, that really, 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 really hurts. But I had to shut it all aside, and it's kind of amazing how your body does that. And that's what I was trying to say at the beginning. Your body does what it needs to live. We all have that survival instinct, and I think it would kick in for everybody. Hopefully that answers your question.
So everything we saw on the screen, it was handheld?
Yeah, it was handheld, just back like this. the funniest thing, and it shocked me when I was asked, the very first like network news that called me about this. Some of the, when it first got on there, CBS, I think it was, calls me, and the news anchor's like, "Is this real, or did you fake this?" And I'm like, what are you, like camera crews and people on, because it does. When you look at the quality of it, it's amazing how it turned out. And it's because it was morning. I was there, like I said, I wanted some coffee, and so it was 10 o'clock. The sun was coming in bright the whole time. It went from 10 to 1, 10 to noon to 2, and so I had perfect light. And I got incredibly lucky. But yeah, it was just me holding it. Uh-huh.
Oh, hello. In your opinion, what percentage of climate change is human-caused versus what would be naturally occurring regardless of human existence?
Well, again, my opinion is tough to say. The key is when you look at glacial cycles. We go through ice ages, we go through warm spells. We go through ice ages, we go through warm spells. And most of the glacial evidence is that we should start heading towards an ice age about now. And so if you just look at that evidence, then it can't be natural because we're supposed to be going the other direction. But the key is just what's in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, water, they have an effect in the atmosphere. It's physics. There's no theory, these are facts. There's more of those gases in the atmosphere. That's a fact. Humans release those gases. That's a fact. And so I try to explain to people, so basically humans release the gases are in the atmosphere. So either the humans release some and a magic fairy takes them away, and then that same magic fairy puts gases in the atmosphere from some other source, or the human gases are just going into the atmosphere. And it's literally that simple. From a scientific standpoint, we're kind of like, I don't even know how to address that question. We emit gases. They're in the atmosphere. It has to be the same thing, unless there's magic fairies running around, moving gases around. There is no other explanation. So, yeah, that's all I could say. Other questions?
Is that what Trump believes?
Oh, goodness knows. And I feel bad because before I was here, King 5 wanted to interview me. And they sort of surprised me. They were like, so what do you have to say to people who don't believe in climate change after all you've seen around the world? And I was like, that's absurd. And I was like, oh, wait, did I say that about the politicians? But it is. It's that, from a scientific standpoint, it's absurd. There is no other word for it. Don't get me wrong. There's lots of questions. What does that mean for the Earth? We know that there's more energy in the atmosphere, but it could mean drought, it can mean flood, it can mean so many different things. And there's scientific uncertainty. In Seattle, what does that mean? In Iowa, what does that mean? But in terms of the process itself, it's physics. More gases, more energy trapped in the atmosphere. There is no other possible way for it to happen. Huh?
Thank you, Dr. Alt. First of all, I couldn't help but think of Indiana Jones as you were talking. So I think you have something in like a mountain-based Indiana Jones if you're looking for a movie opportunity. Second thing, I have 3 questions real quick. So if there's one place you could go back to, which would you choose? The next adventure that you have not yet pursued, what would that be? And then have you eaten at LaFine's Donuts in Bellingham? And if you haven't, you definitely should.
I'll answer from easiest to hardest. First of all, the donuts, no. Only Rocket Donuts so far. What was the other one that I'd go back to? What was the third question? Which one? See, my memory's already going.
It was where have you not been that you'd like to go?
Oh, the next adventure, that's right. So, next adventure, we got a lot of them. I've got friends working in Kazakhstan, and we have no data from Central Asia. So from a science standpoint, I can start picking out locations. Places I want to see, I've always wanted to see St. Petersburg, so those two are kind of both in the same general area, so maybe those Central Asian mountains. More close in time, we're going up to Mount Waddington, which is just a little ways north because it's one of the unexplored regions of not the United States, but it's one of the unexplored regions of North America, and it's so close to us. So I think that's a tough question to answer because I don't plan on stopping. There's lots of things I want to do. In terms of big projects, what I really want to do is cycle from the Gibraltar to the Cape of Good Hope and do an African transect of all the different environmental changes going on by bike, mountain bike, not motorcycle. But so yeah, there's just an endless number of options of things that I want to do. And I think in the short term, we're going back to Lhotse. We've got unfinished business there, and probably the Central Asian. In terms of the place that I go back to, again, it becomes questions of people. The best people, the people I've loved the most in the world are in the country of Bhutan, which is this little Buddhist kingdom next to Nepal. And everybody there was happy. I mean, kids were running around and turning somersaults and just as tickled pink to see as they possibly could be. In terms of beauty, I mean, I go to Nepal, I go to Peru, Switzerland. I love the mountains, and they're really beautiful. So, but I think that's the key is I take students to Peru every year. And so the simplest answer is if I keep going back there, there must be a reason. It's by far the easiest to access, beautiful place in the world. So if you guys want to go to one extreme, incredible place, the Cordillera Blanca in Peru, near Huaraz is, I think it's the easiest and it's the most stunning for the easiestness. To get that kind of view, like in Nepal, it takes a week or more and your head will explode because you're going such high elevation. This is lower elevation, it's doable. So Peru is where I go the most. Other questions?
Do you do tests where you go to the same place every year to measure the differences?
Peru.
Okay, just mostly Peru?
Well, we've been going, it's longer because of the difficulty and the difficulties, but Nepal as well. And we've got a new research station set up in Costa Rica, and so that's not going to be snow, it's going to be vegetation. And then we want to do the same thing on Waddington and some of the coast ranges. So again, we just founded this new institute. We're still looking for people on our external board and donors and other things, students. We are creating a certificate of mountain research skills. And the idea is that we'll begin studying these local ones as well because they're closer. We can do that daily or weekly or whatever. So, oh wait, am I supposed to go back and forth? Sorry, I should probably go back and forth.
Thank you. Have you ever had the experience of meeting a climate change denier and persuading them that there is human-caused climate change? And if so, how did you do it?
Well, I don't know if I'd say quite a denier, but my dad is very conservative, and he sort of, I was in Nepal working for a year on a Fulbright teaching Nepali students, and I was getting ready to come over, and he started laughing. He's like, oh yeah, I read all this stuff about how climate change is a hoax and so forth. And I was like, just come on. And so when he got there and he saw these 3-4 mile long ditches that were half a mile wide and hundreds of feet deep that had been filled with ice 50 years ago, you can't argue with that. He shut up. He didn't say I was wrong. It's my dad, but he did quit arguing about it. But that's pretty much the only time people believe what they believe. And the problem with climate change is it's overwhelming and we don't have options. You know, I still drive a car. It's not like I can levitate, or we don't have a lot of those technological options. And when I go to Peru, I'm blowing pollution all over the place. But that's the world we live in. And so when you say, well, you've got to stop living in the world you live in, that's not an option either. And so that's really what I try and get at in the book and with my talk and everything else is we can't change this. It's going to get worse. And we can either recognize that and begin adapting to it and changing slowly how we deal with the world. But in the short term, if we quit using fossil fuels, there's no ambulances, there's no police, there's no food delivery. And that's not an immediate option. So we have to adapt and begin to change. And I think that's the best we can do.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, sorry about that.
A slightly related note. So as you've shared your research from around the world, can you talk a little bit about your experiences with governments and what their reaction has been? And if you have some stories where you've found governments to be really proactive as well?
Well, and that actually is a great question. And that's one of the reasons I go back to Peru especially. Because in Peru, they want to know what you're doing. They ask me, how is fire affecting this mountain range? How is air pollution affecting these things, our water supply? Then I go to other places, like some of the countries in Africa, and I say, oh, we're coming in, we'll help do some research. And they say, well, just give us a bribe. All we want is corruption. And corruption is the number one thing that drives most of the world, unfortunately. And so when you talk about governments, that's what you're talking about. Again, we were working, with where the elephants are, and you'll see these guys come driving up in Humvees, and they just pay a bunch of money to the Park Service people and start clear-cutting the forest. And so our research in the face of that doesn't mean anything. So I'd say if I had just a simple answer, when you talk about governments, that's really what you're talking about. In terms of like denial of climate change and so forth at our government level, usually what the government says and what happens on the ground, rarely are they meeting together. Corruption is where you typically meet, so. Sorry.
Oh, no. So I think you said you started climbing, mountaineering in graduate school around that age.
Yep.
What advice, or having gotten started, like not growing up in that activity, how did you get started, and how long, I guess, did it take you to get relatively good at it?
Well, and it's tough because traditionally, climbing especially has been an apprenticeship type system if you're going to do it right. You get lucky and you find somebody who's a really good climber who really needs a partner, and partners are the hardest things to find because people have kids and jobs and they don't want to climb as much anymore. And so you end up training fresh partners a lot. And so traditionally that's how it's been done. You apprentice with someone or a group of people and you climb together. Now we've got like the Mountaineers. I met with them earlier today to try and set up classes for our students. Again, I've created this mountain research skills class. It's becoming more dangerous out there. And so you can't just wander out there by yourself. You need training. But there's a lot of options. American Alpine Institute. Again, there's so many different ways to do it. But the key is make sure you're with a safe group and that you trust the people you're with. Because at the end of the day, the people you're climbing with, they have your life in their hand. I was climbing in El Cap in Yosemite. And, actually, I was getting ready to climb. And my friend of mine was like, oh, yeah, there's a guy who needs a partner. You should climb with him. He's a nice guy. And I started talking to another one of his partners, and he's like, I will never climb with that guy again. Because one of the things you do is you climb, and then you fix the rope, and then your partner will put Jumars on it and jug up the rope. And so his partner began jugging, and he fell 3 feet. I was like, whoa, what was that? He starts jugging a little more. He's bouncing the rope as he's climbing. He fell another 3 feet. He's like, oh, my God. And he just starts going faster and faster and faster until he gets up there. And he's like, oh, what happened? He's like, oh, a couple of my anchor pieces pulled out of the rock because they weren't set right. And it's like, I don't ever want to climb with anyone like that. And so that's the key is you can't go out there by yourself. You got to know the people, or you got to be with a reputable group like the Mountaineers or like these institutes. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
In general, how is environmental data used, and how has your data been used?
Unfortunately, the environmental data is not used that often, and obviously now they're trying to flush it away because it's inconvenient. But the idea is that it informs, it depends. For me, it should inform decision-making, especially about resource management. And so that's why when I'm in Peru, I study the impact of fire on grazing lands, because the Park Service wants to know who's setting the fires and how they're spreading, and the people who are doing the grazing want to know what the effects are on the fertility of the soil. So it means something to somebody. But then there's lots and lots of data that's collected because it's really esoteric and interesting and no one else has done it before. And I'm not going to denigrate that. Everyone has their own But for me, that's what it should be, is it should inform somebody's decision-making.
If it doesn't,
Follow? Well, I mean, you can't force it to, and there's lots that doesn't. People study flatworms, and I mean, that's really interesting, and it's something we might probably need to know, but like I said, there's other kind of more pressing questions we have. But sorry, if you study flatworms, I apologize.
So you said you just passed your bar exam. I was wondering if you had any specific plans or what the idea was in pursuing that.
Well, I didn't say I passed it. I don't find out till April, which is terrible. You take it and you have to wait 2 months. I actually went to law school before I went to get my PhD, and the reason was I got done with my undergrad and I knew I wanted to make a difference, but I didn't know how. And I knew law is powerful. It allows you to do a lot of different things. But at the same time, I saw that most lawyers have absolutely no idea what's going on in science. And so that's why I went to get a PhD. By mixing the two together, then I'm an informed advocate. And it's a really good question. I've been living in Kentucky, and so there was no real opportunity to do much of anything there environmentally. But here now, I hope to use it when talking about things like there was a recent Supreme Court case where they've said that groundwater, we have to do various things because groundwater extractions violate certain federal water quality laws. And that's stuff I've studied in grad school, so using it in that way to sort of inform local responses is kind of the key, I think, with law degree.
Thanks.
Oh.
I tried to get my friend to come up and ask this question, but she refused. But so historically, our planet has come in and out of ice age.
Mm-hmm.
And, our environment is prolonging that process of going into our next ice age. So is it something that you think it's just not going to happen or eventually, or, because it's always an up and down. So I totally believe in everything that we're doing is infecting the environment, but I halt to think that it's going to prevent our whole next process of our planet. So.
Well, and again, other people know more than I do, but every scientist, we have discussions like this at things like the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the consensus is that there will be no more ice age until humans are extinct. That is the scientific consensus. So the problem is the ice age cycle has only been going on for 1 million, maybe years. 3 million years ago, there was no ice on the planet. So the Earth goes through really hot, really cold, and it's these million-year-long cycles. If it was back in an ice age, we all wouldn't be alive. We can't produce enough food in those cold time periods. So we don't want an ice age. But we also, no glaciers on Earth, we probably can live, but Florida's gone. So it's inconvenient. For us, we're fine. We got the mountains. We just move up and we start living on Mount Rainier or something. But the Earth changes and it can do a lot of different things. It's us wanting it to stay still, and our combines and our tractors and our dams to not be affected by it. That's kind of the problem. But we won't have another ice age.
Okay. Well.
I'm sorry.
You
think I'm a bummer. You go to these science conferences and it's terrible because they're all just like, how can we stop climate change? No more fossil fuel use starting today. And they're not joking. If you want to do it, that's what you have to do. And that's clearly not an option. And they start talking about sea level rise. And it's like, Florida, London, there's other cities.
So what you're saying is no more snow angels?
Well, see, that's the funny thing. Everyone thinks, global warming means no more snow, right? We still get snow. We got lots of snow this year. All global warming does is it adds energy to the system. It's like if you turn the hose up a little bit and instead of just flowing, it starts going. That's what's happening. Blizzards get worse, heat spells get worse, floods get worse, droughts get worse. Everything has more energy in it. It's like if you give a kid a bunch of sugar. Whatever happens, the climate's just going to do the same thing, only more of it. So,
So, question that's one part pragmatic and one part a bit goofy. You've expressed a lot of above mild concern for climate change. You seem a little bit concerned about it at the very least. But you've also, expressed kind of a pragmatic viewpoint towards society, saying that it's really nice having, police and firefighters and food delivered and things like that. If I made you King John-All with your own, Secret Service to get your coffee for you, since obviously that's a very dangerous thing for you, what would be your official decree to stop or to mitigate climate change as much as possible without totally turning the whole system on its head?
I really would, I have a good answer for you, and I really wish that I had the figures for this, because everyone asks the same question, again, at these science conferences. And so a guy from MIT just got up and said, all right, what is the global world's energy needs? And extrapolates population and say, all right, in 2100, we're going to need X hundred terawatts. And if you burn every ounce of oil, that gives you like 20% of it for what we'll need. Again, population growth, increase in energy use. Wind energy gives you like 6 terawatts. And so on, you go down the line. The only choice that's even remotely feasible to provide energy in the next 100 years is solar. It's unlimited. We need like 100 and it's 2,000 or something. And so all of the other options with we can do this, we can do this. Problem is we obviously aren't there yet. The sooner we start pushing that way a little stronger, the better it'll be. And not because the world's waiting on us. China's working. When I go to Africa, that's all they use is solar. But we are innovators. We've made a lot of really great products. And if we could take half of what we put into an iPhone towards solar systems, we could make a difference. We could have cars that just had solar panels on them and were self-feeding. So again, from a science standpoint, that's your only answer. Nothing else. If we had every square mile of the earth covered in windmills, it's not enough. Geothermal, it's not enough. Nothing will do it except solar. And so, okay. Well, I don't really know what you mean by unaffordable. I mean, I've used solar most places I go, but a lot of it is the utilities fight against it because it takes away their monopoly. And it's just we don't have the infrastructure in place. We haven't, as a society, decided that's something we want. In Africa, they have. And you can go into the grocery store and buy a solar panel, and you can hook up your home for cheap. I mean, it's Africa. People are not wealthy there. So the technology's out there, everything's out there. We have these social systems that are blocking it. And that's what we have to do is begin adapting.
Part of it is supply and demand, and the price of solar has been going down exponentially as more of it is being produced. And the technology for manufacturing it is just going up, skyrocketing, and becoming so much more efficient that we're going to meet that sweet spot where it is affordable and efficient and available. It's just not happening as fast as we'd like it to, but it's coming.
Well, and the other thing we have to do is solar depends on rare earths, both for the batteries as well as for the solar panels. And there's a lot of rare materials that we need. And in order to leverage it up around the planet, we just don't have the capability right now to get those many. They call them rare earths for a reason. They're rare. And until we can find alternatives that don't need those rare elements, that's one of the things that drives the cost up so much as well. So, any other questions? Are we done? Well, thank you all. I hope you enjoy the book if you read it. And you better read it.